Starting out in ARK can be a hugely daunting task. There's so much to learn, and even a lot of the basics aren't really explained anywhere. So when it comes time to begin taming, it can be pretty hard for a new player to know what's worth going for and what's not. Alright folks, my name is Freyn, and today I'm going to be going over my top 10 best beginner tames. These aren't necessarily the most useful, or even the earliest to get a hold of, but they're all ones that a new player shouldn't struggle too much with, and will help ease the journey towards ascension. As always, if you find this video helpful, please do consider a like, subscribe, or share around. But for now, let's get started with number 10, the Triceratops. A favourite of many child and inner child, the Triceratops is one of the most well-known dinosaurs to have ever been discovered, and one of the first things a new player will encounter in-game. They spawn pretty much everywhere except for the snow biome, so locating one shouldn't take long, and they have a really low saddle requirement of only level 16, so you can pretty much start trying to get one almost as soon as you're off the beach. With a massive 85% damage reduction to the head, combat boost against large carnivores, and a pretty solid knockback against smaller critters, the Triceratops is a really solid early defensive tame. Something that, in my experience at least, I really needed early on when I started to take those first steps away from safety. But sadly, that same damage reduction also makes them a little tougher to knock out without a trap. And this trickier taming combined with a low top speed sadly prevents it from being used as a more general long-term mount, which is why it falls in at the bottom of our list. Next up we have the Sabertooth. Decently mobile with a solid jump, low mid-level saddle, and a very small hitbox, the Sabertooth can make for a good first caving mount, at one time even being the tame of choice for a bit of spelunking. It's a little outclassed overall these days, as it doesn't boast a particularly high health or damage stat, certainly worse off than the more popular choices like Baryonyx or Thylacoleo, but by comparison it is a much simpler tame to acquire. Being very abundant in the rockier areas, it's not going to be something overly hard to find, and it can be easily restrained with a bowler and tamed efficiently with some prime meat, resulting in a far more approachable option for any new player who's looking to take their first steps underground. Number 8, the Rex. One of the most famous creatures to ever live. Who would expect the Tyrant Lizard King, one of the highest bite forces known, to be on a list of beginner tames? It's a backbone of many a survivor's collection and one of the most common tames taken into boss fights. A simple, brute force creature with high health and high damage that remains useful from the second you acquire it to the moment you leave the island. Despite this strength though, it is deceptively simple to tame, as a survivor can outpace a wild Rex on foot, allowing for a nice and simple shoot and scoot approach. It's this combination of power and simplicity that makes it into a good beginner tame in my opinion, but its only real drawback being that it's quite a late acquisition thanks to a saddle requirement of level 74. Nonetheless, if it is your first time through the ARK, you really can't go wrong getting yourself some Rexes to help out with the endgame fights. For number 7 we have the Raptor. One of the first dangers a player will encounter when they step off the beach, and again, one of the earliest saddles available at level 18. A nice simple tame to acquire with just a bowler and club needed, a lone Raptor can make for a pretty speedy scout early on, although it does struggle a little with the weight capacity. Its real strength though is in the pack, as for each additional Raptor past the second, their potency is further increased, and the alpha gains access to a pack call, giving even more damage, resistance and speed to the entire group. Sadly, their usefulness will drop off as the game progresses, as they have relatively low stats overall and will struggle to carry survivors decked out in any of the heavier armor sets, so it's best not to invest too heavily into them once larger creatures become available. In at number 6 is the Lord of Toads, the Beelzebufo. Being found in the dangerous swamp areas of the map keeps me from putting this any higher on the list, but this toad has a number of uses that can really help a player out. First and foremost, it's a great transport tame, able to easily traverse the landscape with high jumps, decent speed, and perhaps most importantly, a complete lack of slowdown until fully encumbered. As you may expect, it's also pretty decent at getting around underwater. It's not going to fight its way out of a shark blender, of course, but it neither uses stamina nor oxygen when submerged and has good mobility in every direction. Beyond this, it can be used as a taming helper in a pinch thanks to some torpor-inflicting attacks, although it does take 10 seconds for it to fully apply, so be careful or you'll be at risk of killing the target before it falls asleep. Its hops combined with a compact size even combine well to make a decent caving mount, allowing you to skip quite a number of wee beasties along the way, and is especially useful in the Redwood Swamp Cave, as it not only has a damage multiplier against the insects that populate it, but automatically turns them into cementing paste, helping it to maintain some relevance into the late game. Coming in at number 5 is the Argent Turis, one of the single most useful creatures in the entire game, only really being let down as a beginner tame due to where it spawns and a saddle level of 62. With high health, stamina, weight, and even decent damage for a flyer, it's an excellent mount just on its statistical merits, but its real value is in an unmatched carrying capability. The already huge weight limit is amplified further by 50% reductions to all types of metal, crystal, obsidian, stone, polymers, and black pearls, and more importantly still, it can even carry other creatures. In fact, almost all the main gatherers a tribe will need throughout their journey can be carried in an Argent Turis claws, and if the server settings allow, it can even cheekily be used to drop wild creatures into pens for easier taming. Further utility still comes in the form of a secondary beak grab for smaller creatures, a saddle with built-in smithy, rapid regeneration, and even a decent knockback, helping to fend off far more attackers than it probably should be able to. It is an absolute monster of a tame that very few players will ever want to be without. Our next entry is the Ankylosaurus, a perfect pairing with the Argent. The single best metal gatherer in the game at present, with both a high harvesting rate and extremely high 85% weight reduction for raw metal, any good Anky is going to see endless use by a tribe. So much so, in fact, is the importance of metal at every stage of the game that gathering capability alone is a good reason to put it on this list. Beyond that though, it is also surprisingly good boss tame thanks to some deceptively high damage, high health, and its main drawback of speed not really being a factor in most of the Guardian's arenas. Able to be found in either mountainous regions or the much safer herbivore island, it's a nice and simple knockout tame that can be acquired pretty early on, and even getting a low level will still increase your metal gain substantially. It's a real must-have along any survivor's journey, but its only real letdown being a lack of versatility. For number 3 we have the first flyer available, the Pteranodon. That first time you take to the skies, the entire game changes. Being able to avoid all the danger on the ground is undeniably huge, and an aerial view will help with exploration to no end. Once acquired, the world becomes so much more accessible, and you can start hunting for all the other tames and resources you may need with much more ease. Getting your Pteranodon, or PT as most call it, is extremely simple. They can be found on almost any beach around the island, are vulnerable to bowlers, and take extra damage from both projectiles and headshots, so much so that quite often at a lower level can be knocked out in a single shot. Another tame that is definitely worth getting early on, but again probably not worth getting too many of them as their usefulness will gradually drop off due to a fairly low weight capacity and sadly subpar combat. Next up we have the Mosschops. Quite often one of the first creatures a new player will tame, as it is found on most beaches and usually has some very low requirements such as single Majo or Tinto Berry hand feed. Well known as a coward that runs from every fight if not ridden by a player, many do actually not realise just how high its damage can be. In fact, being on par with larger creatures like the Baryonyx or Carnotaurus. And this damage combined with no need for a saddle can allow a very low level survivor fresh off the beach to defeat some threats that would normally be far out of their capabilities. Where it really excels at though is a gatherer. Perhaps the ultimate gathering tame even, with 3 different attacks that each harvest different resources. Fiber, thatch, wood, berries, meat, chitin, flowers, mushrooms, polymer, and prime meat can all be gathered by the Mosschops, with some even being done autonomously as it wanders around. And all of these can have their gathering rate boosted further still by the additional harvesting levels it gains alongside its regular XP. It's an all-around amazing early access tame, unless of course you manage to find the one diva that is demanding honey. And finally, at number 1, we have the Iguanodon, a real jack-of-all-trades dino bringing everything a new survivor might need into one nice package. Spawning almost everywhere on the map, it can be easily acquired with just a bowler, some tranquilizers, and a handful of medjo berries. It's an incredible early mobility mount with 2 swappable stances. The bipedal allows for reasonable jump, faster turning, and not awful combat function, while running in quadrupedal mode is quicker and has literally 0 stamina drain, allowing for some very easy getaways from dangers you might not be prepared for. An above average weight capacity will allow you to keep gathering for longer before having to return to base, and it has a special function to turn any berries in its inventory into seeds for an easy early farm setup. It's an honestly all-round great tame for new players, and one that I think is quite often overlooked. And there we have it, in my opinion, the 10 best beginner tames. Do you agree, or would you change some, or perhaps even all of them? Let me know in the comments, but for now, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.